My business partner secretly stole my company's prototype, so I destroyed her entire empire. Before we continues, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps this powerful life-changing story reach the world. My name is Claire. For as long as I can remember, I have been driven by an obsessive need to create, to build, and to innovate. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood where nothing was handed to anyone, which instilled in me a fierce, unbreakable work ethic. By the time I was 27, I had poured every single ounce of my energy, my meager savings, and my relentless passion into founding a boutique software development firm called Lumina Tech. I was the brilliant, exhausted architect behind the computer screens, writing thousands of lines of code late into the night. My business partner and supposed best friend, Sarah, was the charismatic face of the operation. We met in college, and I foolishly believed our bond was completely unbreakable. While I lived on cheap takeout and slept under my desk to ensure our software was flawless, Sarah spent her days attending high-profile networking events, shaking hands, and wearing expensive tailored suits paid for by our initial seed funding. I never minded the stark difference in our roles. I genuinely believed we were a perfect balanced team. I had absolutely no idea that my closest friend was secretly viewing my immense talent as her personal ticket to unearned millions. The dynamic of our startup was deceptively simple, but incredibly dangerous. I was the chief technology officer, handling the grueling, highly technical architecture of our products. Sarah was the chief executive officer, managing the finances, the investor relations, and the public relations strategy. Because I hated the spotlight and despised corporate politics, I willingly handed Sarah total control over the business administration. I trusted her implicitly with the company checkbook, the legal contracts, and the heavy strategic decisions. I was too busy staring at multiple glowing monitors, desperately trying to finalize our flagship product, a revolutionary predictive artificial intelligence algorithm that I named the Apex Code. It was a highly complex, beautifully designed piece of software that could accurately predict market trends for major logistics companies. It was the kind of industry-disrupting technology that tech giants pay hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire. As I grew closer to finalizing the final, perfect version of the code, the atmosphere in our small, cramped office began to mysteriously shift. Sarah, who was usually loud and overly communicative, suddenly became incredibly guarded, tense, and unusually secretive. The first red flag was incredibly subtle, the kind of tiny detail you easily brush off when you are running on 3 hours of sleep. I noticed that Sarah started locking her office door whenever she took phone calls. She had also installed a highly encrypted, third-party privacy screen on her primary laptop, making it absolutely impossible for me to casually glance at her screen when I walked into the room. Whenever I enthusiastically tried to show her my latest breakthroughs with the Apex Code, she would brush me off, claiming she was overwhelmed with tedious administrative paperwork. She stopped asking about the functional mechanics of the software and started asking highly specific, deeply unusual questions about the legal copyright framework and the source code's physical server location. I naively assumed she was just preparing for our upcoming series of investor pitches. I told myself she was just feeling the immense, crushing pressure of our impending product launch. I pushed my growing anxiety deep down into my stomach and poured another cup of black coffee. I needed to finish the prototype. I had no idea she was already actively building a massive, invisible guillotine directly over my head. The devastating truth finally revealed itself on a freezing Thursday night. The office was completely empty, or so I thought. I had left the building around 8 o'clock, but halfway to my apartment, I realized I had accidentally left my apartment keys sitting right on my desk. I drove back to the dark office park and quietly let myself into the building. The main floor was pitch black, but a thin, bright sliver of light was creeping out from underneath Sarah's closed office door. I assumed she had fallen asleep at her desk, just like I often did. I walked softly down the carpeted hallway, intending to gently knock and tell her to go home. But as I raised my knuckles to the heavy wooden door, I heard her voice. She wasn't asleep. She was on a highly animated, deeply hushed phone call. "The prototype is basically finished," Sarah whispered eagerly, her voice laced with a dark, greedy excitement I had never heard before. "Claire is compiling the final build this weekend. As soon as it hits the main server, you initiate the transfer. We push her out of the LLC on Monday, and Nova Dynamics launches the code on the 1st. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I held my breath, terrified to make even the slightest sound. I already transferred the patent applications into my name, Sarah continued smoothly, her betrayal casually slipping from her lips like venom. Claire never reads the legal documents anyway. She just signs wherever I put the yellow sticky notes. She's a brilliant coder, but she's a total idiot when it comes to business. Nova Dynamics is going to be a billion-dollar company, and we won't have to share a single dime of the equity with her. I felt a sudden massive wave of pure, suffocating nausea wash over my entire body. I slowly backed away from the heavy wooden door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold my car keys. I stumbled out of the dark office building and collapsed into the driver's seat of my car, gasping for air. My best friend, the woman I had trusted with my entire livelihood, was actively stealing my life's work. She had set up a dummy corporation, stolen the intellectual property rights, and was planning to blindside me and legally evict me from my own company in a matter of days. The betrayal was so incredibly deep, so fundamentally shattering, that it took me hours to stop physically shaking. I sat in my cold car, staring blankly at the dark office windows. I realized that confronting her right then and there would be the biggest mistake of my life. If I kicked open her door and screamed at her, she would immediately know I was onto her. She would panic, lock me out of the company servers, and use the fraudulent legal documents she had already filed to destroy me. I was the technical genius, but she controlled the company's bank accounts and the legal representation. I was entirely outgunned in the administrative arena. To survive this, I had to be smarter, colder, and infinitely more ruthless than she was. I wiped the tears from my face and made a silent, unbreakable vow in the darkness of the parking lot. I was not going to be the naive, tragic victim in her sociopathic success story. I was going to let her believe she had completely won, right up until the exact moment I burned her stolen empire to the absolute ground. The next morning I walked into the office with a bright, cheerful smile plastered across my face. It was the absolute hardest acting performance of my entire life. "Morning, Sarah," I called out happily, dropping my bag on my desk. "I'm making a fresh pot of coffee, want some?" Sarah emerged from her office, looking slightly tired but incredibly smug. "That would be great, Claire. How is the final code compiling?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with hidden greed. "It's flawless," I lied smoothly. "I just need a few more days to iron out some minor interface bugs, and then it's ready for the main server." I watched the immense relief wash over her face. She thought I was still her oblivious, hard-working workhorse. For the next 48 hours I worked in absolute terrifying secrecy. I didn't touch the main company servers. Instead, I quietly hired a highly discreet, incredibly expensive forensic IT expert named Marcus, paying his exorbitant retainer entirely out of my personal savings account. We met late at night in a noisy, crowded diner far away from the tech district, huddled over my encrypted laptop. Marcus was a digital ghost, a brilliant hacker who specialized in corporate espionage defense. I gave him deep administrative access to our office network. It took him less than 3 hours to uncover the massive, terrifying scope of Sarah's betrayal. "She's not just stealing the code, Claire," Marcus explained grimly, pointing to lines of hidden data routing on his screen. "She installed a hidden, highly sophisticated backdoor Trojan directly into your local area network. Every single keystroke you make, every email you send, and every line of code you write is being automatically mirrored and silently uploaded to a private, offshore server." He pulled up the registration data for the offshore server. It belonged to an LLC called Nova Dynamics. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. "Can you trace who officially owns Nova Dynamics?" I asked, my voice hard. Marcus typed furiously for a few minutes. "It's registered to a man named Gregory Vance," he said. Gregory was Sarah's wealthy, arrogant boyfriend, a rival tech venture capitalist who had always looked down on our small startup. They were in this massive, illegal conspiracy together. I knew that simply deleting the backdoor Trojan would instantly alert them that I knew about their scheme. I had to let them steal the code. I had to let them take the bait entirely. "Marcus," I said, a dark, brilliant plan rapidly forming in my mind. "I don't want you to block the data transfer. I want you to manipulate it." I explained the highly complex architecture of the Apex code to him. The software was fundamentally reliant on a core foundational database to function. Without that specific, highly encrypted database, the predictive algorithm was entirely useless. It would just generate random, chaotic errors. I am going to build a secondary, completely separate version of the code, I told Marcus. It will look exactly like the real Apex code. It will have the same file size, the same interface, and the same file names. But the core algorithm will be fundamentally hollowed out. When Sarah's Trojan steals the files this weekend, I want you to ensure it only copies the hollow decoy, not the actual functioning software. Marcus grinned, a wicked, highly satisfied smile spreading across his face. A digital Trojan horse, he noted. I love it. The weekend arrived, and the tension in the office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah was practically vibrating with nervous energy, constantly hovering near my desk, desperately waiting for me to announce that the project was finished. On Sunday evening, I dramatically hit the enter key on my keyboard, leaned back in my chair, and stretched my arms. It's done, I announced loudly, making sure she heard me perfectly. The final build is officially compiled and sitting on the main local server. Sarah's eyes instantly lit up with a terrifying predatory joy. That is amazing, Claire. You are a genius. She praised me, her voice dripping with fake sickening sweetness. You should go home and get some rest. You've earned it. I packed up my bag, pretending to be exhausted but thrilled. I walked out of the office, got into my car, and immediately opened my secure laptop. Marcus was already on the encrypted line. She took the bait, Marcus confirmed, his voice crackling over the audio feed. The unauthorized data transfer initiated the second you walked out the door. Nova Dynamics just downloaded the hollow decoy code. Monday morning brought the devastating theatrical betrayal I knew was coming. I arrived at the office to find the glass doors padlocked shut. An aggressive, highly intimidating private security guard was standing in the lobby. Sarah was standing behind him, holding a thick stack of legal documents, looking incredibly cold and corporate. What is going on? I asked, feigning total absolute shock and panic. Sarah handed me the heavy stack of papers without a single ounce of genuine emotion. Lumina Tech is officially dissolving, Claire, she stated flatly, sounding like a robot. Our initial seed investors pulled their funding this morning. The company is bankrupt. As the CEO, I made the executive decision to liquidate our remaining assets to cover our massive debts. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. The security guard will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items. I stared at her, forcing tears of pure, devastated betrayal into my eyes. But the code, I cried desperately. The Apex code is finished. We can sell it. Sarah shook her head, a cruel mocking smirk playing on her lips. The code belongs to the creditors now, Claire. It's over. I allowed the security guard to heavily escort me to my desk. I packed a small cardboard box with my coffee mug, my framed photos, and a few desk plants. I sobbed loudly, playing the role of the utterly defeated, entirely crushed victim to absolute perfection. Sarah watched me walk out the door, standing tall and arrogant, deeply believing she had just successfully executed the greatest corporate heist of the decade. She believed she had legally insulated herself, stolen my brilliant software, and completely destroyed my future without a single drop of blood on her hands. The moment I drove out of the office park, my fake tears instantly vanished. I picked up my phone and called my highly aggressive, incredibly expensive intellectual property lawyer, whom I had secretly retained days ago. Did you secure the real patents? I asked him, my voice razor-sharp and deadly calm. Yes, Claire, my lawyer confirmed. The authentic foundational architecture of the real Apex code is now entirely patented, copyrighted, and heavily locked inside an impenetrable blind legal trust. Strictly under your name. Nova Dynamics doesn't own a single line of your actual intellectual property. The following 3 weeks were a masterclass in psychological patience. I stayed entirely off the grid. I didn't post on social media, I didn't answer calls from mutual friends, and I completely vanished into the background. Sarah, meanwhile, was highly visible. She and her wealthy boyfriend, Gregory, were suddenly the dazzling darlings of the local tech industry. They began aggressively hyping the upcoming launch of Nova Dynamics, promising a revolutionary new predictive software that would change the world. They sent out hundreds of expensive, glossy invitations to a massive, highly exclusive product launch gala at the city's most expensive convention center. They invited billionaire venture capitalists, major tech journalists, and industry leaders. They were preparing to publicly unveil the Apex code, my code, and use it to secure hundreds of millions of dollars in instant series of funding. They were so incredibly blinded by their own arrogant greed that they never once bothered to deeply test the stolen software architecture in a closed, simulated environment. They simply assumed my genius was flawless, and they eagerly rushed to the massive, glittering finish line. The night of the highly anticipated Nova Dynamics launch gala arrived. The convention center was absolutely spectacular, decorated with massive LED screens, expensive open bars, and sleek, modern furniture. Hundreds of wealthy investors and journalists mingled in the massive ballroom, eagerly waiting for the highly hyped presentation. I did not receive an invitation, of course, but Marcus, my brilliant IT expert, had easily hacked into the event's digital guest registry and created a flawless fake press credential for me. I walked into the crowded ballroom wearing a sharp, tailored black suit and dark glasses, blending perfectly into the sea of reporters and tech executives. I stood quietly in the very back of the massive auditorium, my heart pounding with cold, highly focused anticipation. The heavy velvet curtains finally parted, and the massive crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. Sarah and Gregory walked proudly onto the brightly lit stage, looking incredibly glamorous, incredibly wealthy, and incredibly smug. This was their absolute peak. This was the exact moment they thought they had conquered the entire world. Gregory grabbed the microphone, flashing a brilliant, expensive smile to the crowd of wealthy investors. "Welcome to the future," he announced dramatically, his voice echoing through the massive room. "Tonight, Nova Dynamics is incredibly proud to unveil a software algorithm that will fundamentally disrupt the global logistics market. A project spearheaded by our brilliant CEO, Sarah." The crowd politely applauded. Sarah stepped up to the podium, glowing in the bright stage lights. She didn't mention my name. She didn't mention Lumina Tech. She completely erased my entire existence, proudly taking absolute, total credit for the agonizing years of grueling labor I had poured into the code. "We call it the Nova Engine," Sarah lied smoothly, gesturing to the massive jumbotron behind her. "And tonight, we aren't just going to tell you about it. We are going to show you a live, real-time demonstration of its predictive power." The wealthy investors leaned forward in their expensive chairs, highly intrigued. This was the moment of truth. Sarah pulled a sleek tablet from the podium, ready to remotely run the stolen software directly onto the massive screen. I quietly reached into my pocket and pulled out my own secure, encrypted smartphone. When I built the hollow decoy code for Sarah to steal, I hadn't just removed the functional algorithm. I had added a very specific, highly destructive piece of hidden programming. It was a digital kill switch, a self-destruct sequence designed to violently execute upon receiving a remote, encrypted command. As Sarah proudly tapped the screen of her tablet to initiate the live demonstration, I quickly opened my secure command app, typed in a complex 12-digit alphanumeric override code, and firmly pressed the glowing red execute button. Instantly, the massive 60-foot jumbotron behind Sarah violently glitched. The sleek, highly produced Nova Dynamics corporate logo violently warped and distorted, emitting a loud, harsh blast of screeching digital static through the massive stadium speakers. The crowd violently flinched, covering their ears. Sarah frantically tapped her tablet, her confident smile completely vanishing, replaced by a look of sudden sheer panic. "Just a minor technical difficulty, ladies and gentlemen," Gregory yelled nervously over the loud screeching noise, rushing to her side. The massive screen suddenly went entirely pitch black. The entire auditorium fell into a dead, terrifying silence. Then a single highly stark line of bright red, glaring text slowly typed itself across the massive screen for every single billionaire, investor, and journalist to clearly read. Fatal error. Source code unauthorized. Sarah's face drained of all color. She stared in absolute horror at the screen. Before she could even react, the red text vanished, replaced by a highly detailed, massive digital waterfall of legal documents. My lawyer had designed the kill switch payload perfectly. The screen was now brightly displaying the official heavily stamped United States patent and trademark documents, clearly showing that the foundational architecture of the software legally and exclusively belonged to me, Claire, and my heavily fortified legal trust. The final, incredibly devastating blow came seconds later. A massive booming audio recording echoed through the silent auditorium. It was the exact, undeniable recording Marcus had captured of Sarah's phone call the night I discovered her betrayal. Nova Dynamics is going to be a billion-dollar company, and we won't have to share a single dime of the equity with her. Sarah's recorded voice echoed cruelly across the room. Absolute, total chaos violently erupted in the massive ballroom. The wealthy investors began shouting angrily, instantly realizing they had been lured into a highly illegal, massive corporate fraud presentation. The tech journalists furiously started typing on their laptops, capturing the massive, catastrophic meltdown live on the internet. Gregory turned on Sarah, his face purple with blinding rage. "What is this? What did you do?" He screamed at her right there on the brightly lit stage. "You told me the code was clean." Sarah was violently hyperventilating, backing away from him, entirely trapped in the harsh glare of the spotlights, her massive fake empire crumbling into absolute ash in a matter of seconds. I slowly took off my dark glasses and confidently walked straight down the center aisle of the auditorium. The angry crowd naturally parted for me, their eyes fixed on my sharp, unrelenting expression. I climbed the short stairs to the main stage, walking directly up to my terrified, violently shaking former best friend. Sarah stared at me, her eyes wide with absolute sheer terror. "Claire," she whispered, her voice a pathetic, broken gasp. "Please." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. The massive screen behind me was already doing all the heavy lifting. I reached into my black suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of highly official, heavily sealed legal documents. I slammed the heavy papers directly into her trembling hands. "You've been served, Sarah," I stated, my voice echoing clearly into the live microphone on the podium. "This is a multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit for corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, massive wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Every single computer server owned by Nova Dynamics was legally frozen and seized by federal cybercrime authorities 20 minutes ago." Gregory gasped loudly, realizing his entire venture capital firm was now deeply implicated in a massive, highly public federal crime. He literally dropped his microphone and ran frantically off the stage, completely abandoning Sarah to face the devastating, catastrophic fallout entirely alone. The devastating legal and public fallout was incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. Within 24 hours, Sarah was a massive, highly toxic pariah in the global tech industry. Every single major news outlet ran front-page stories detailing her incredibly arrogant, highly illegal corporate heist. The wealthy investors who had attended the disastrous gala immediately filed their own aggressive, massive class action lawsuits against her for criminal fraud and misrepresentation. Because my aggressive legal team had successfully frozen all of her assets, Sarah couldn't even afford to hire a decent defense attorney. She was rapidly evicted from her highly expensive luxury penthouse apartment, entirely stripped of her fake stolen wealth. Her arrogant boyfriend, Gregory, completely threw her directly under the legal bus, desperately taking a harsh plea deal with the aggressive federal prosecutors and loudly testifying that Sarah was the sole, highly manipulative mastermind behind the entire criminal operation. She was left totally isolated, completely ruined, and facing a very long, incredibly bleak future behind strict federal prison bars. While Sarah's toxic, fake world violently burned to the ground, my actual, authentic empire rapidly ascended to the stars. The highly public, incredibly dramatic spectacle at the launch gala had inadvertently created the greatest, most massive viral marketing campaign in the history of the tech sector. Every single major tech giant suddenly desperately wanted to fiercely bid on the authentic, highly functional Apex code. I didn't need to pitch to arrogant investors anymore. The billionaires were aggressively lining up outside my door, desperately begging to write me massive checks. 3 weeks later, I sat in a highly secure, incredibly luxurious corporate boardroom and officially signed a massive, highly lucrative acquisition deal with one of the largest, most respected technology conglomerates on the entire planet. I sold the rights to the Apex code for an incredibly staggering, life-changing sum of money, while permanently retaining a highly powerful, extremely influential seat on their executive board of directors. I had successfully transformed a massive, devastating betrayal into the ultimate, incredibly brilliant victory. A few months after the acquisition, I received a highly pathetic, deeply desperate email from Sarah. She was awaiting her massive federal sentencing hearing, entirely broken and completely terrified. In the email, she frantically begged for my forgiveness, loudly claiming she had been heavily manipulated by Gregory, entirely trying to play the tragic, helpless victim one last, pathetic time. She desperately asked me to publicly drop the civil lawsuits, crying that her life was completely, utterly ruined. I sat in my large, sunlit office, reading her pathetic excuses. I didn't feel a single drop of anger anymore. I didn't feel any lingering sorrow. I just felt a deep, profound sense of cold, unrelenting indifference. I didn't reply to the email. I simply forwarded it directly to my aggressive legal team to add to the massive mountain of federal evidence against her. And then I permanently blocked her email address forever. She had made her deeply greedy choices, and she was going to face the brutal, inescapable consequences. I used a fraction of my massive newly acquired wealth to build an incredibly beautiful, highly secure modern mansion, overlooking the quiet rolling hills outside the bustling city. It was a massive, gorgeous sanctuary, completely entirely funded by my own relentless hard work, my brilliant intellect, and my unbreakable resilience. I hired Marcus, the brilliant IT expert who helped me secure the decoy trap, as my new chief head of cybersecurity, paying him a highly lucrative, massive executive salary. We actively built a brand new, highly ethical startup incubator, deeply dedicated to fiercely protecting brilliant, vulnerable young coders from predatory, greedy corporate vultures like Sarah. I surrounded myself only with highly loyal, deeply trustworthy people who actively valued absolute honesty over fake, glamorous illusions. I had completely cleansed my life of toxic, parasitic betrayers. On the exact day of Sarah's official, massive federal sentencing, I didn't even bother to watch the news coverage. I knew the strict judge was going to hand her an incredibly harsh, highly restrictive prison sentence for her massive corporate crimes, but her miserable fate was no longer my concern. I was too busy living my extraordinary, highly successful life. I sat quietly on the massive, beautiful terrace of my new home, sipping a hot cup of expensive coffee, watching the golden sunrise slowly illuminate the sprawling valley below. I thought back to the dark, terrifying night I sat in my freezing car, having just discovered the devastating, shattering betrayal. Felt like a lifetime ago. The woman who had cried in that parking lot was gone, entirely forged by the intense, brutal fire of betrayal into a brilliant, unbreakable, unstoppable force of nature. My name is Claire. I am a highly respected technology executive, a multimillionaire, and a woman who absolutely refuses to ever be a silent, naive victim. My former business partner secretly tried to steal my prototype to illegally build her own massive empire, deeply believing I was too focused on my work to see the knife aiming directly for my back. But she severely underestimated the quiet, terrifying power of the architect. I didn't just stop her massive theft. I used her own blinding, toxic arrogance to completely expose her, utterly ruin her, and perfectly launch myself into the absolute stratosphere. I built my massive, incredibly beautiful empire directly on the ashes of her complete, devastating destruction.